Recording is on.
All right, today is November 22nd, and we're continuing our discussion on the Desiderata Extinctionati. Today's topic is a combination of the coronavirus situation and surveillance. And we'll start off, Gary, can you repeat kind of your question or statement?
Yeah, Sophie and Hugh were discussing how there's sort of news of people denying the existence of the virus, and I was asking the question that in the sort of age we live in, where everything just comes at us from a screen or something like that, and any kind of news can come up. And if you picked one item and decided you were going to follow it up and verify for yourself if it was something that was true, if it was something that really happened, you could face a seriously hard time doing that. And then, you know, in a way, you can see that situation is being manipulated by people who are spreading disinformation. On the other hand, you can't blame people sometimes for not trusting what they hear, because we live in a world where, well, it's not a village, I suppose. You know, as Hugh might say, we've exceeded Dunbar's number. We don't know this news from our own experience. We just got to take it as it's delivered to us. And, you know, you've got to exercise some discretion and hunt around. So, go on, Sophie, do you want to say something? Or you? No, she's leaving for the cake.
I'm just apologizing.
I don't know.
I have to leave with 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just exploring this fact that like, you know, I mean, for instance, when I first heard that classic story about how the Americans never landed anybody on the moon, they just shot a video in the Arizona desert somewhere, and I thought, yeah, all right. Well, supposing I wanted to walk out my front door today and go and find out for myself absolute proof that they went to the moon, I'm not so sure I could do it. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and then the quantity would be an avalanche, and I'd say, okay, I'll accept it just because it's an avalanche, but that's not conclusive proof. So I don't know, we're kind of stuck between people who manipulate information and the fact that a lot of information is not something that you can verify from your own experience. And so you're open to being, you know, manipulated or end up believing something that's simply not true. I don't know.
So,
do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah. So things are a lot better today from that point of view. People don't realize it, but if you go back in time and look at, say, Randolph Hearst, and say the turn of the century, yellow journalism was much worse, and there were much fewer sources. So it was much harder to figure out what was going on, say, at the turn of the last century than it is now. So it's very easy, in fact, to actually verify the news now. It's just a question of bothering, but they don't layer it very deep when they snow you. You can find out very quickly with Google searches. And what we've lost, though, that people in, say, 100 years ago had, and you know, I know from growing up in South Africa, where you know for a fact that everything is Pravda, and it's the news is controlled, it's censored. And as I mentioned before, everybody knows how to read Pravda so that you can glean the truth between the lies. It's not that difficult. Now, nobody has that skill anymore because they're kind of spoon-fed, and they kind of believe authoritarians and they believe specific sources, but that isn't how you distill the information. The main thing is, why it's easy generally to figure it out is because people were psychologists, and you know exactly what the state wants you to think, and you know exactly what each faction wants you to think. And then you can see what their motives are, and then you can see why they say what they say. But it's pretty easy to scrape that aside and read between the lines and see things like, you know, they're all standard techniques. underreporting, over-reporting, diverting. So it's very easy to read Pravda and say, soybean production is up. And you say, why are they making that front page news? It's not up that high and stuff. And then you think, why would they be trumping up soy? Say, well, there must have been some fucking crop failure. And then basically you can read between the lines. Once you've kind of got, okay, there must be some other crop that failed and they're trying to cover that up. Then you can start to think, well, what would that crop be and stuff. And then you will start to see indirect hints that saying, okay, cereals will rations of cereals will go down half. And you think, okay, must have been wheat. And slowly you can piece it together. Then you can go and look at the rainfall data and say, oh, well, we had a drought, the wheat's collapsed, and therefore basically it's easy to see. And so you can read through Pravda straight away from the, soybeans are up headline. Now, people don't do that anymore. They tend to just believe, the New York Times, and they forget that the New York Times or something like that, even unintentionally, that they can misreport because they have a certain assumption and biases in it. The reason why people like Bezos buy newspapers like the New York Times is not so that they can manipulate the headlines. It's so that they can set the tone and the culture in the magazine. So they would buy a newspaper so that they can set the editor as the person they want. And then that editor isn't going to go and curate every single headline and say, no, we want to snow the people this way and we want to pretend there's a coronavirus when there isn't. And it doesn't work like that. They automatically have some, basically, they're from the same club. So they report from that club, from the way the club wants to see the world. And so conspiracies and that don't quite work the way people think. They far more subtle. And now we've got all the tools to read between the lines. You can quickly Google your way into a kind of a reading of Pravda by just looking at other sources and what they say, and eventually you can piece together something quite easily. This is a well-known thing that was who was it? Somebody like Gladwell or something wrote a book about it. It's wisdom of crowds. So you can crowdsource what the truth is relatively easy now because you've got so many sources. So if you just read in a silo, yeah, of course you can be snowed. And indirectly, I mean, if you read just The Guardian has a viewpoint of the world, that the world is going to pieces, ecology is falling apart, you should be doing activism, and that's the way they read the world, and that's the way they interpret it, and that's the way they report it. And so it's nothing that they've actually got a conspiracy to say that. But if you read a number of sources, if you read the opposite number, and it's easy to find what the opposite number of any journal is, and you can see that they say something that then allows you to infer what the truth is between the two. It's not that difficult. What's happening now is people are not doing it. But if you go back to Randolph Hearst and say the San Francisco Chronicle, the news manipulated world events far more. So the Spanish-American War was created by Hearst. In fact, they ran a headline that when the war started, they said, "How do you like our war?" Headline. they weren't even ashamed of their yellow journalism. And so you would never be able to get away with that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's way better than people think. Well, apart from my point is that people are not skeptical enough and they don't read from broad enough sources.
Yeah, what I wanted to say, a situation I was thinking of was one that happened here recently where the government issued a statement saying that there have been cyber attacks by the Chinese government on Australian government and, other important sort of sources. Now, as a result of that, or what they claim is that they've now spent an enormous amount of money ramping up cybersecurity, and where you're getting a statement like that from the government, which is impossible to verify, there's no way anyone else is going to know whether there was a cyber attack by the Chinese government on the Australian government or not. It's entirely an internal thing that nobody on the outside is going to be able
not at
to.
all. No, not at all. You can go and look at Kaspersky. You can see all the attacks for the day. There's a lot of information on the cyber attacks that are going on. Yeah. Yeah. No, you can certainly verify
you
that.
You can see it.
Thing.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
No, I didn't realise that. Yeah. Although I mean, the other side of it was that I really felt that they were just using that as an excuse to ramp up surveillance. It was pretty obvious what they were doing. In enormous nut, they were employing 500. They wanted 500 new employees in. Can't think what the name of the department was now, but it was, and an enormous amount of money being put into it, and it's 100% surveillance. And realistically, probably a lot of it is just within the country.
Okay, so this is a good case in point. So how would you verify it? Well, the first thing is you go and have a look at other sources that back up whether there's loads of threat analysis and internet threat analysis. The dozens of sites where you can see whether there was attacks. There are attacks going on all the time, by the way. But if, for example, you found that there weren't attacks, but then they make a big song and dance of it, then you know what the government's doing, and then it's like you say, they're just basically doing internal surveillance. But if that's true, you can also see a threat. You'll see indications beforehand that would indicate that that's about to happen. Is that they would start sending out. You would see a little internal thing in the Australian government. There would maybe a little power struggle. People were shuffled in the security agency. A new guy came in. He makes a speech about how terrorists are big threats.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
You can see all the trail, and then suddenly, there's a huge big attack on Australia, and it's like nobody verifies that. There's no other indication apart from him, and suddenly you're spending all that. Well, then you know exactly what happened. You see the case in point how easy it is to read between the lines. And in general, it's basically if things don't add up, then they don't add up. So look at the U.S. election. Almost definitely there was massive foreign interference in the election. I found it very strange that no one will say it, and even Trump tweeted, that there was no foreign interference and it was a safe election. It was like, well, straight away, why the hell would you tweet that? And then they just fired the NSA guy because he wouldn't say that there was foreign interference. And you say like, okay, well, it's pretty fucking obvious. There was masses of foreign interference and they don't want that said. So obviously, another bit of information that there's a lot of behind the scenes infighting about, hey, I want to expose all the foreign interference, and it's like, no, shut up about that. It's more important than you just stand down. If you're not an idiot, you can see what's going on. So if you go back over the year, all these guys are doing these things, saying this is in the previous election. They said, there was masses of interference, but it's just gearing up for 2020. And everybody, even before, a month before, then they're saying, there's so much indication that everybody and their dog is going to interfere in their election. And then suddenly the election happens, and then suddenly, squeaky clean. Nothing happened. It's like, really? you mean China and Russia just took the day off? It's not credible. So you can see how you can read between the lines and figure out what's probably really going on.
I'm wondering how sophisticated they're being in terms of that scenario playing out just as you're described, but playing it out so it doubles back on itself. So they assume there's going to be people like you who can read the situation. So they start off, they double it back on itself again, so that you think you've read it, but they've known that there's somebody like you out there. So they've deliberately got you they've deliberately set it up in reverse. I can't explain that very well. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, basically they'd use reverse psychology and try and trick you. So as states go, the more savvy the population gets, the more they play those games. But our population is completely brain dead, so they don't care about people like me. People, you see, people in a foreign state government, in a foreign state, they would make this analysis instantly. So they would do the kind of analysis I'm doing. And so it's no secret at the state level, all that kind of stuff is they all know how to read between the lines. And so there's no secrets at that level for that kind of information. They don't give a rat's ass about the public, because the public is completely polarized, makes up its own story. They're all in silos, so they don't really care. They don't have to really keep all of the stuff secret. All they do is spin it. So they have loads of stuff going on in the background that they're just spinning for public consumption, and then for state actors and stuff like that. It's they used to call it the great game. So there's this great game going on behind the scenes, and just one small sliver of it is the press. But they just spin it up. Yeah, the more important thing that people are missing is that this is all going on, and they're completely untrustworthy. Liberals, in particular, they don't think there are conspiracies. But they're conspiracies 9-5. That's all the guys do, is conspiracies non-stop at that level. And liberals don't realize that. They kind of, it's more, kind of feminine, and it's more agreeableness and trusting and stuff. It's all these mammalian brain attributes. And so the more important thing is people believe the damn thing they hear. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are in effect liberals behaving the same way as the kind of rump of just dumb people who can't think their way out of a paper bag? They're just getting all treated as one lump of manipulatable, one big mass that you can just manipulate.
No, they're not being manipulated. See, they complicit. They want to be fooled, right? So if you have a look at, say, like after the Soviet Union, when suddenly they give realistic reporting, and then you got to see what the country was really like. All these statistics that the Soviets would never report, like how many mass murderers there were, and how many cannibals there were, and all these weird shit going on in these subcultures suddenly came to the surface. And I remember some old babushka, some old Russian woman out in Siberia, they interviewed her and said, well, do you prefer it now that you have more accurate reporting and you can know what is going on in the country? And she said, no, I much preferred it under Pravda, when Pravda just gave the news. And they said, but that was all bullshit. He said, yeah, we knew it was bullshit, but it was better that way. See, we didn't have to face all the stuff that we have to look in the eye now. So people want to be lied to. They're very willing participants. People are scared of freedom, and they're scared of the truth. And so, yeah, it's basically they're looking for excuses to support the trust. So they're trying to feel good and avoid anxiety. And if you tell them everything your school teacher told you was a snow job, and basically she's just prepping you for the gas chambers, then that's hugely distressing. And it's far easier to just dismiss, the message, and just say, I don't care if these authority figures are really Machiavellian and Dracula. I still would rather prefer to see them as beneficial, because it's just makes for a nicer life for me. And so that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean that's the bit I have trouble getting my brain around. Yeah, go on. Oh, yeah, ask. I'll talk.
Come back to the virus there, because I mean, when you by what you're saying, after what you're saying, I'm thinking, why would some people want to spread such an extreme polarized. The media at the moment are giving an extremely, oh, we have to be careful, it's terrible, da, 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 lockdown, etc. And on the other side, you've got the other side polarized saying, no, there's no virus, it's a hoax, etc. And what I understand the interest of the people who want to inform. Some of them are genuine, probably wanting to reduce infection and especially trying to save an ailing health system that's not able to cope with it. Because if the health system was good, we wouldn't have any problems. We'd be able to cope with it. But I don't understand the agenda of people who are trying to say that the virus is a hoax, and I don't understand why it's always the far right, and why are they doing this, and who's buying into that.
I think
So, oh yeah, go ahead.
I think it just has to do mostly with the spectacle. I think people just like doing this stuff. Like, I have a couple of liberal friends, and they well know that the election process is completely corrupt and all that. And when I remind them of this, there's crickets, and then they just go back to engaging in the discourse and all this stuff. It's like, I think he was exactly right. They it makes it easier for them. They're kind of complicit, and that makes for a more comfortable life. When you start talking about like how the election process is corrupt and completely run by money and banksters, it's just too complicated for them. They just like dealing, with the spectacle. It's sort of like a game.
Yeah, simplicity is a big part of basically normalcy. So people want comfort in normalcy. And so the reason why it's all on the right is because there's a large element of testosterone that goes into conspiracy theories. If you listen to people on the left, like Michael Shermer and stuff, who has all these hack analyses of why people believe weird things, was a book he wrote about, conspiracy theories. There's, to the left, they think that what they're doing on the right is they're thinking, oh, well, somebody thinks, well, I can figure out what's going on and see behind the scenes, and other people can't. So therefore, I'm, basically it's an ego thing, and I'm better than you. And so that's what, when the left says that, and Michael Sherman, what they're really saying is more about the left than the right. They're saying, if I was on the right, that's why I would be doing it, because the left is extremely narcissistic. So they were saying, the only reason I can see why people would do conspiracy theories is because I'm a narcissist and that would make me feel good. And so that's the left's narrative for explaining conspiracy theories, but it's not accurate at all. The reason why people come up with conspiracy theories on the right is that it's really a male thing. I put in one thing saying, basically I put one comment saying that conspiracy theorists are from Mars and left wing is from Venus. And they don't believe from Venus, basically the mammalian brain is agreeable, trustworthy, it's full of oxytocin. What's happening on the right is it's all full of testosterone. And why they coming up with these theories, it's paranoia. They really want to resolve uncertainty. So it's kind of a male rivalry thing where you try and see patterns, and especially patterns of rivalry in the data, and join all the dots. So that's really what they're trying to do. It comes from paranoia. It doesn't come from trying to be clever. So that anxiety then allows people to make leaps that are unwarranted, because you have to think of them kind of like people in panic, and people in panic jump to conclusions because our brain is designed that way. Its brain is saying that, if the house is on fire, then don't get too analytical. Just take things as they are. But what that means is that people can see connections and stuff, and then they go a bit John Nash, joining too many dots. But it's the guys that are conspiracy theorists, they have cortisol and anxiety. That's what's driving them, not trying to be clever like the left. The left should have more distrust, and they should be a little bit more nervous about the system. Yeah. Oh, did it all
Now,
go quiet?
Hugh, you've been talking a lot. You've been talking a lot about the vaccine on Reddit lately, and you put some interesting articles about that. And we're just before we end the subject of the virus. Would you have any ideas and things to share about what you've found? Because I'm as a doctor, I had a discussion with a colleague the other day about that, and they're totally in a in the mist. They totally. The one I was talking to is very disciplined and will do exactly what the medical council says, and he will follow the guidelines and da. So he was not going to question anything. But if you push him a little bit, he realizes that they're going into total unknown land, and that but he doesn't want to see that he could be putting first some people at risk. But I don't think he sees that, because if he saw that, he's honest enough not, he would be honest. I think there's a kind of denial that, again, that authority can be wrong, that the medical council can be wrong, that the World Health Organization can be wrong. I see that among all my colleagues, and I'm not an extreme anti-medicine, because I still have, I mean, I might say practice one day, I don't know, but I just see the kind of, it's terrible what's happening in my profession, absolutely terrible. And all that because the health system is not working. So because it's not working, you're trying to use methods that are not rigorously tested, studies that are not peer reviewed, but they're just falling into it like full speed. You know, we're going to vaccinate. That colleague told me he was going to get vaccinated. And I looked at him and my arms nearly dropped. Said, do you know what? And I'm not one of those, anti-vax. And no, it's not that. I'm just like, we've only a few months into this first wave. And he said, no, it's the second wave. I said, no, it's still the first wave. Look at the world. It's still a dome like this. It's still going up. And he's like, oh, no. They say it's the second wave. They say, you see. Do you have something to share?
Yeah, it's
All of you.
lockdown. It's lockdown 2.0. It isn't wave 2.0. But yeah, so the main thing that I think about the whole virus that people are missing is that it's kind of, they think of it kind of like the weather, and it was just a freak accident, and it's not. Oh, if I could get one message out to people, it's saying that the virus is, we earned it. So basically, what the virus is saying is nature's way of saying that the people are too urbanized. The population densities are too high, and people are traveling too far and too fast. That's these viruses. No pandemics before 10,000 years ago. It was impossible to have a pandemic because the viruses couldn't make a leap between neighboring villages, and that is the way it's supposed to be. So the very first thing you have to know is say, we asked for this virus. Basically, we said it's a trade-off for civilization. So he's saying, like, nobody's saying that. They're saying, like, well, these things happen. No, these things happen because we've opted for the global economy and industrialized civilization that's urbanized. It's not an accident. This is exactly why we have, strong defenses in terms of psychology, in terms of loads of reasons. Even warfare, perhaps at the tribal level, might have been to separate people so that you can't get diseases, and basically, especially jumping more than, say, one tribe. So the thing is, I wish people would say that these pandemics are 10,000 years old. They come part and parcel with civilization. So if you want civilization, shut the fuck up and take the pandemics. And one of them, by rights, should wipe us all out to about 10%. And that is the way that nature works. It's basically, it's built into the deal. So but once you establish that, you have to say what these guys are doing is unconscionable, because they're trading off global industrial civilization and the economy against human lives. So it's exactly the thing is basically they're making the calculations as if we were in World War I, and they're guys that are sitting behind in the planning offices, planning the battle, and they say, well, I think this objective is worth taking 10,000 troops out for. So they're using civilians as if it's a battle situation, and what they're fighting for, the territory they're fighting for, is $1. They're fighting for the global economy. Now, what people ought to say is stop saying, all this stuff about vaccines and human agency and stuff. Is like, humans could stop this in about 6 weeks. If the entire world locked down like they did in Wuhan, they did it in Wuhan. They could just lock down like they did in Wuhan, and then basically it would stop. The reason why they're not doing it is because of economics. So what nobody is saying that we are paying the price for global industrial civilization. And so once you say that, it starts to look bizarre, because I'm looking at fucking boats, cruise liners coming past here. I'm looking at planes taking off. You're saying there's a global pandemic. There should not be a single movement, but they don't want that. So instead of having this narrative that this is something that was visited on us by the fates, you're saying this is something we earned and we chose it. So the governments are choosing that people die. That's the first thing. And so then what the next thing that's bad about it is then they come with all these experimental vaccinations. So the first vaccinations to come out is an entirely new field of research that hasn't been approved for humans because it was experimental, and they were on a path that would have taken decades before they were allowed to use, these are self-amplifying messenger RNA vaccines. So self-amplifying messenger RNA vaccines are used in cattle and stuff, but nobody's used it on humans, and they're going to use it. It's going to save them billions and billions of dollars to fast track it. So they're using the pandemic to fast track these experimental vaccines, because basically then to save the economy. So there's a double whammy where they're basically throwing people under the bus twice. First to save the economy, then to release all these experimental vaccines. And so it's being very, very rash, because they should be taking a global pandemic far more seriously than they are. Because what happens if they do vaccinate billions of people, and it turns out that, say, there's health effects 10 years down the road, or it's the chances that you can introduce a max vaccination program, or mass anything, that has no consequences is completely unbelievable. So what they're saying is, we don't know what the consequences are, and we don't care what the consequences are. And the public is saying, I just don't care, give me a vaccine. And what you're saying is, I will take a bullet for the global economy. And so nobody's having that conversation. I think that's the way to actually see it.
Hugh, I just reminded of something, and what you're talking about, the consequences of a vaccine, because there's also been discussion about, what sort of things could they be putting in with the vaccine that obviously leads to greater control of society by, all of the whole eugenics thing that you were talking about now and then. I was just thinking the other day that at this stage, they could do something like find a vaccine and decide to use it. And they can't quite work out what nasty thing they want to put in with it. But what they do is put in like a placekeeper. In other words, something that will make you sick unless you come back for the next vaccine. And by the time you get to the next vaccine, they might have had a better idea of what they really want you to have. But you still have to keep coming back, because you've got something in you that will come out in a year or 6 months, or, that there could be this process of sort of forcing people to come back, and then they get successive chances of vaccinating you with something that's got some ulterior motive to it.
Yeah, so this is a really important thing, and this is where you lose the audience, because the left-wing audience, because they don't do conspiracy theories. But I'll tell you that it's not quite like a conspiracy theorists say. They say, if you're thinking in terms of, well, they caused this pandemic so that they could have an excuse to vaccinate the whole world, and then they're going to do all secret stuff in the vaccines like eugenics. It's saying that's a little bit too direct. Why it's dangerous is because they could have vaccines, like you say. They might have like Monsanto's Terminator seeds that stop, means that you have to have a booster. A lot of these vaccines, especially the cheap ones, the messenger RNA ones, are real cheap. So they're like $1 a shot. they're going to charge you $100, but they're really costing them less than $1. But basically, these cheap and cheerful vaccines, they're going to basically have 2 or 3 and then a booster. Okay, so now this is bad from a number of reasons, from building up resistance and stuff like that. But anyway, beyond that, just the social implications and what we're talking about, which is the conspiracy, is what. It's not likely that they did all this pandemic directly for a conspiracy. But what happens is messenger RNA vaccines, if they then become mainstream and used all over the place, and they're used continually, basically they will expand. They'll use them for much more. They can roll them out very quickly, so they'll use them for the flu. And then when all this infrastructure and it's become normalized as part of our culture that everybody gets a jab once a month, then what's very likely is you get these characters that come out of the woodwork that are Dr. Strangelove and things, and they just use the available infrastructure. So I put out the thing about Wouter Basson. So that Wouter Basson thing was in South Africa. They were doing a eugenics program with Israel, and basically Israel was trying to basically use autoimmunity to sperm with Israel. Israel was trying to do this with the Palestinians. South Africa was trying to do this with the black population. Now, those Wouter Basson met with all these people all around the world. They're still doing the research. You can still see the papers. And the papers barely hide the eugenics. They say, could be used with feral animals and stuff. And it's like, oh, feral animal, for Christ's sake. They just barely hide that it's, ethnic bioweapons research is what they're doing. So there are all these labs around the world that are doing eugenics research. Now, when it's normalized that everybody's having the vaccine, it's highly likely that you get some nutcase that says, well, why don't we just do this? Because that's exactly what South Africa did. It's only when, say, the wall comes down in the Soviet Union, or you have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, that suddenly all this stuff gets exposed. But it never gets exposed in Britain and America, and everybody thinks, well, they don't do it. Well, like hell they don't do it. They're doing ethnic spermicidal immuno vaccines research in the States, in the UK. They say it's for basically, for a, what do you call them? Contraceptive. So they say they're doing contraceptive research. But if you read between the lines, they're saying all the stuff that could be used for mass sterilization of feral animals and stuff. And so like, guys, just say unwanted surplus populations, because we all know that you're not talking about rabbits. Okay. So this research is going on all the time. And if you normalize vaccines and viruses and then make it part of our life, they're going to use it. It's only a matter of time before a nutcase uses it.
But when I started working, I was in obstetrics gynecology, so I didn't see all that. But when I moved to work in country practice and I started doing a bit of family medicine, I discovered that between 2000 and now, well, when I stopped a few years ago, babies were vaccinated for basic things when they were born, like, tetanus, polio, diphtheria, a few basic things that were given to kids for all the duration of my medical studies and up to 2000. And suddenly you started to see they started to have 4 vaccinations, then 5, then 6 with boosters that were done at 4 months, 6 months, before going to school. It suddenly grew like mad. And then suddenly the flu vaccination started to appear, because it was costing a lot, of course, to the state. And as you know yourself, urbanization, as you were saying, high density, the flu was becoming a burden on the workforce. So they started to impose a flu vaccination to health workers, to people in a certain age, over 65, people who were in nursing homes, etc., people with diabetes, people with asthma, people with all sorts of immunodepressing diseases. And now we're at a stage where it's become, like you say, hyper-normalized, that people are having vaccinations all the time. You saw the emerging of travel bureaus of vaccinations because of the the madness of tourism, the madness of consuming holidays and traveling, where you had young people going into those very lucrative businesses. I know some colleagues who worked in them, and they had the list of the countries where they were going, and you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this, and they would come out vaccinated like mad before taking a plane for a 2 or 3 weeks vacation. And it was, so that's become normalized. It's that all these things are already in place. The last 10, 15 years, this has started to happen. Now, the COVID is giving a sort of a booster maybe to this also, because it's going to become now with the fear factor, it's going to be more easy to say to people, now you're going to have 2 vaccinations a year for COVID. You have to have an extra one if you travel. And they're already vaccinating people in China who are traveling within China. Some business people, I think there's been about 10,000 people vaccinated in China at the higher level of society, people who got a lot of money, people who travel, who fly a lot. They've already been vaccinated out there. So what you're saying is actually already happening. I'm not saying that I'm against, I'm not going into this kind of, I want to vaccinate my kids. It's not that. It's just that it's been established now as a norm. It's there.
Yeah, the bigger question that nobody's asking is not, oh, is there a vaccine? When is the vaccine? What they should be asking is, do we want to live this way? Because they're going to have more and more penalties for not getting these vaccines and stuff as they become cheaper and easier. That's not, Bill Gates thinks this is a wonderful world. It's not. It's Brave New World. And say what people are not noticing is we're slipping into Brave New Worlds very soon, especially in places like America. The health insurance will stop covering you for stuff unless you have a whole list of boosters and vaccinations and things like that. There'll be all these subtle penalties. If you're in the military, you won't be able to opt in or out. You won't be able to put your kids in school unless they've had all these, all these vaccinations. So it's not quite the anti-vaxxer thing is, oh, does it make the kids autistic? It's like, do we want to live in a world? Okay, so think of this. If we've been incredibly lucky not having massive pandemics, global pandemics up till now. We just miraculously dodged the bullet. It's just luck. Now, our luck has clearly run out. The law of averages and basically regression to the mean says we should have lots of global pandemics to make up for all the time when we didn't. Now, think of this. What it means is if they have all these things available to handle global pandemics, not only will global pandemics be part of our life, but also they'll be able to make population densities higher. People will be able to travel faster. Basically, you're really taking the brakes off the things that the virus is trying to tell you, which is saying, slow down, stop the way you're living. So it's kind of like, everybody's not looking at it the right way. They're saying, in terms of alcoholism, it's enabling our alcoholism for civilization. So these, it's like saying, well, we've got to put better seatbelts on drunk drivers. And so everybody says, well, you can't argue that seatbelts are bad. And you say, well, in a way you can, because if you basically say all drunk drivers must have 3 seatbelts, it's basically they feel safer. They feel they'll drink more. And basically, you're not getting anywhere. Basically, there's a price to pay. Things equalize, and it's not a brave new world. It's a shitter world we're moving into, and people are not seeing it that way. They're just looking at like, yeah, we got blindsided by a virus, and then basically technology comes in and saves us. And they're saying, no, we didn't get blindsided. Technology caused the pandemic. You can double down with technology, but it means you're getting shitter. It means basically our ancestors are going to live in a much shitter world full of, permanent boosters and nutcases like voter person. It's not a world you want to live in. So it's much bigger than this.
And then you go to the pub and get pissed and go on holidays and stupid cruise ships. Basically, that's what they want.
Well, think of the collateral damage of all of this. So basically, if we normalize pandemics and we normalize rapid treatments for them, not only do we normalize basically giving more money to all the scumbags in the healthcare industry, but think of all the collateral damage. Like COVID now could get into cetaceans. and basically you don't know how it's going to rip through dolphins or something like that. We could lose the dolphins at a stroke. So while you expand all this kind of madness, the chances of some shit coming down are bad. So the conspiracy theorists are right. They're just too specific. In general, the conspiracy theorists will be right given enough time. So it doesn't matter if I come up with an amazing conspiracy theory that's wrong now. It doesn't matter, because you say, how many times can this happen before some nutcase does do that? So I can give you the examples like Bota Basson and all these other guys that saying they littered throughout history. There were 1 in 20 of these bastards are out there doing conspiracies. So saying, if they didn't do it this time, you've just given the vehicle for them to do it next time. So it's, I don't know why our analysis is so shallow and why we're not thinking. I kind of have a feeling that if this was 1945 or something like that, or the 30s, people would be saying these kind of things, saying, is this the world we want to, where are the George Orwells and stuff saying, look where we're going, people? No one's saying that. They're like, right here, it's like, can we have a vaccine by December? It's all, it's such a shallow conversation. It's like no one's saying, should we be doing this? Should we be having a vaccine? No one does that meta-analysis. It grieves me greatly.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
you're
I'm
right
wondering.
there. I think you're right there,
Go
hearing
on.
the September. It reminds me of like September 11th. Like, the U.S. government got away with the Patriot Act and all these lies. I think they're gonna use fear and use the coronavirus to get away with a whole bunch of stuff, including maybe standardizing these vaccines and stuff, and putting up more regulations on people.
But what about all the stuff, just contact tracing and all the surveillance that goes with it? It's just like, oh, we need to do this because of Islamic extremists. Oh, we need to do this because of pandemic extremes. Oh, and they're just one more damn threat and a whole lot more restrictions on civil liberties. And so basically we're becoming more and more incarcerated by each one of these threats. And so in saying like, well, this is a threat we should eliminate by stopping the behavior that caused it. In other words, we should slow down the economy.
Yep.
Here, where you were just talking a moment ago about George Orwell, was it? I've often thought that because you're sort of lamenting that we don't have that kind of thought now, and that there's generally not that kind of commentary going on. I don't know, I just have the impression that kind of died out about mid-century, last century, as though a lot of those people, like Orwell, I think had the benefit of living, had a kind of an education and a life that was a lot less, how can I put it? I think we've become too much like a cookie cutter education, and those in that earlier, say, half of the 20th century, there were a lot of people who could think clearly because they'd been able to have a more individual, a more less homogenized education and upbringing and that kind of thing, and they had the flexibility of thought. They weren't subjected to that early conditioning and that kind of thing. That we've really sort of educated ourselves out of those kind of people, and so you just don't have that kind of narrative going on now. We're constantly referring back to them rather than being able to have that kind of discussion freshly made in this time.
Yeah, I think of it particularly with my dad. So my dad was born in 1925, and in his education, in the education system of the time, it was far more elite, and they taught the guys how to think and how to question. So they were natural skeptics, and then they would spend a lot of time analyzing, society and our culture and the direction it was headed in. By the time my dad was quite elderly, say in the 1980s and 90s, he was like, then those people were more like elder statesmen, and people still valued the fact that they saw the world in that way, that they were big picture people, and they had longer range. And but after the turn of the century, 2000, after 2000, that generation really kind of died off, or was not appreciated at all. And in the last couple of decades, they not appreciated at all. Nobody gives a rat's ass about somebody that's well read, is a generalist, as a deep thinker, a broad thinker, and is basically a skeptic. And now it's like we've got no use for these people. It's like, how do you get ahead? How do you make a buck? Everybody's an individualist. And so it's that what that generalized education did, it really cheapened it. Basically, it made everybody into a production line commodity, that it commoditized the education system, so that everybody now is just whether you're productive or not. So, and that's the only measure, is, are you productive? Do you make money? And so the only thing people care about is billionaires. It doesn't matter. I mean, look at the billionaires today. They're as thick as pig shit. You look at Elon Musk. He's almost a cretin. And everybody hangs on every word he says, and like he's some sage. It basically, I heard him, that thing I posted, I was laughing my head off, because he was describing to a technical audience F equals ma. It was Newton's, first law, and saying how a rocket worked and stuff. It's like, for fuck's sake, man. This is a guy who's setting the pace for whether we become a multi-species, a multi-planet species. And these are really deep implications for us as as humans. And there he is, just talking at the level of a grade school thing, and everybody's hanging on it. What is Elon gonna say next? It's like, it's just, I just want to throw up. I mean, a mixture between laughing my head off and throwing up, listening to these people. But the only reason they have credibility is because they have vast fortunes. They didn't make the fortunes. Bill Gates, now everybody listens to, but Bill Gates is a crook. He stole his fortune. He's a cheat. He basically, he only got started because of his connections. His mother had connections in IBM. It was basically a fraudulent sale. His kudos to IBM, the MS-DOS system that got him started and got his first. It was fraudulent. He basically played two sides off each other in a way that he should have gone to jail for. And then he makes a huge fortune, and he basically just surfs this fortune. And then he comes and then talks about geoengineering and shaping the planet and stuff. And everybody, and then the topic is, can we geoengineer? And basically, how would it be done? And it's like, can we just talk about, should we be doing this? Nobody's talking about that, because, it's like, billionaire said so, and billionaire has IQ of 100.
But Gary, what you are saying is very true about the men and women of that period of and the change that happened. And I also link that to the emergence of the intoxication with television and that sort of media, because I don't know, I don't have a television, and I was not exposed to it young, and it was not in the culture in my family, and people were not, I grew up in the 60s, so there was very little, we were outside. But what I see is that around me, people spend so much time, I've spent so much time through their life, so many hours a day getting their food from a tube instead of thinking, reading, discussing, debating. I find it hard to have a conversation, debate with an average person around me, because what they're talking about is a lot of it is about what they're watching on TV or reality. I don't even know what they're talking about most of the time.
Yeah, I was thinking that today. Like these conversations. Sorry.
When you fly, you see over poor countries, you see dishes everywhere on slums. So it's not just us, the privileged white, living in the West, that have been completely disconnected from thinking, but it's everywhere. We don't realize the amount of hours the human brain is completely gone. and that started around the 80s, 90s, where you say that people started to start thinking for themselves. It might be very basic what I'm saying, like a granny saying, oh, the TV, but I really think it's very important. It's very, very important.
No, yeah, I'm intrigued by what you said. I was kind of imagining in my mind a trajectory that for a little while in the 60s and 70s, there seemed to be a breakout of something different. That then, like during the 80s, it plateaued, and then it went down in the 90s and down in the early 2000s, and now it seems to be just dropping vertically, as though we just reached a certain peak and that was as good as it was going to get, and then died away. But yeah, going back to what you said about the television, I suppose if you subtract the television, then a curious person has got to hunt around for what they want to take in, and they're going to be getting it from all different sources. It's not all going to be spoon-fed to them from one place. But if I can go back to, we were talking about doctors a little while ago, and I feel sorry for them because in a way they're caught in the system. If they're not personally comfortable with this vaccine situation, for instance, they can't really say that. They're caught up in a system. Like if you want to keep working in this hospital, as a doctor, it's compulsory. You've got to have those vaccinations. The nurses have got to have the vaccinations or they don't have a job, whether they agree with it or not. I can't visit my mother in a nursing home because I'm just not going to have another vaccination to satisfy their requirement. And that's a bit fucked. Like I had a long conversation with my doctor about, he's got some alternative viewpoints. And I said, well, what's the situation with the flu vaccine? And he said, well, in about 2% of cases, it will help you. And he said in almost the same number of cases, it will actually make you sick. And that's about it. In other words, basically what he was saying to me is this is completely useless. And yet there's this huge industry over it. And all these compulsory requirements for compulsory vaccination is something that apparently, this guy's not an idiot, that apparently is just basically a bit of a con job, really, for the amount of use it is. I'll leave it at that anyway for the moment.
Yeah, that thing I posted about
place to be at the moment to be in medicine. It's and for me, for years personally, for years I've been in. It nearly affected my mental health, and it really. I mean, I was burnt out trying to put up with this knowing and seeing and putting up with. I could talk about this for hours. We might have that on another conversation one day. But yes, it's very.
Well, yeah. Well, see, this is the thing that the doctor is kind of as a doctor, you're expected to play this very straight establishment line. I suppose it goes with the kind of I don't know what you want to call it, the whole aura surrounding doctors and professional standard and trustworthiness and all the rest of it. But then they get caught up in this business where they can't question the status quo because it's also built into that situation.
Yeah, it's a difficult place to be. I tell you, very difficult.
Yeah, just on that.
Again, you have to resist, and one way or another, you can find ways. There's always a way. There's always a way, and I know some who do resist in a clever way, and you just have to. It's like in everything we're talking about. If you start to see things as they are, well, you have to reject a lot of things that you have learned and ways of thinking and ways of acting and even ways of looking at the whole concept of health. So it's a whole, we're going away from the conversation about the virus there and surveillance, but you can rebel, but it's very nearly impossible if you want to stay in a hospital or if you want to practice in an establishment because you're tied up with registration with the medical council, health insurance, and certain type of regular formation that you have to do, and it has to be in line, and it has to be seen by tutors, and you know, you've got, so if you try to stray, it's nearly impossible. You know, nearly impossible.
And another thing I wanted to say about, you know, like narrow perspectives and broad perspectives, it's that, you know, that we all know that the media industry and the schools give people a narrow perspective, and then you basically go out and then like the culture industry has you. But the thing is in order to get that broad perspective, you have to put in the work, and it's not fun. It doesn't give you dopamine hits. It's not fun to do that. And most people aren't going to read books, and most people aren't going to research history and figure out what's really going on because it's not fun.
Yeah, I think that what's missing is the think time. Is nobody puts in any think time. So if I think of my dad, one of the memories I have of him is reading, and then he would stop and he'd put the book down, and he'd look into the distance for about 10 minutes, just thinking about what he had read. Now nobody does that anymore, but that used to be, that entire generation